Hello, and welcome to another epic video of mine. Today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and complex characters in all of Elder Scrolls lore, the first Dragonborn himself, Miraak. Miraak's origins stretch back to the Merethic era, specifically during the Dragon War, a time when dragons ruled Tamriel with absolute authority under their leader Alduin, the World Eater. During this dark period, mortals were nothing more than slaves to their draconic overlords, forced to build temples and offer worship to beings who viewed them as little more than cattle. But among the Nordic people of ancient Atmora and early Skyrim, there emerged champions known as the Tongues, warriors who could use the Thu'um, the voice, to battle the dragons on somewhat equal footing. These heroes learned the dragon language and turned the dragon's own power against them. But even among these legendary figures, one stood apart. That man was Miraak, and he possessed something that made him fundamentally different from every other tongue who ever lived. He had the soul of a dragon trapped within a mortal body, making him the very first Dragonborn. Now, to understand Miraak's significance, we need to grasp what being Dragonborn truly means in the context of Elder Scrolls metaphysics. A Dragonborn isn't simply someone who can shout really loudly. They're a mortal blessed with the soul of a dragon, which means they can instantly absorb and understand the Thu'um in ways that would take normal mortals decades to master. More importantly, they can permanently destroy dragons by absorbing their souls, preventing them from being resurrected by Alduin or other powerful dragons. This made Miraak incredibly valuable to the rebellion against dragon rule, but it also made him incredibly dangerous to everyone around him. As the first Dragonborn, Miraak initially fought alongside other Nordic heroes against the dragons, and his power grew exponentially with each draconic soul he consumed. But here's where Miraak's story takes its first dark turn, because unlike the other tongues who fought for freedom and liberation, Miraak began to see opportunity in the chaos. He realized that with his unique abilities, he didn't have to simply defeat the dragons. He could replace them as the ruler of mortals. This realization was likely influenced by his growing understanding of the Thu'um and dragon nature, because as we know from dragon lore, dragons are inherently dominating creatures who see themselves as naturally superior to all other forms of life. With a dragon's soul, Miraak would have felt these same impulses, and over time, they would have grown stronger and more difficult to resist. The turning point in Miraak's story came when Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge and Fate, approached him with an offer of forbidden knowledge. Now, Hermaeus Mora is one of the most dangerous Daedric princes to deal with, because his domain isn't just knowledge, it's specifically forbidden knowledge. The kind of information that fundamentally changes those who possess it. Mora offered Miraak secrets that would increase his power beyond anything the other tongues could imagine, including the ability to bend dragons to his will rather than simply destroying them. This knowledge came at a price, of course, because dealing with Hermaeus Mora always does. But at the time, Miraak believed he could control the situation and use Mora's knowledge without becoming enslaved to the Prince of Fate. This was, naturally, a catastrophic miscalculation that would define the rest of Miraak's existence. Armed with Hermaeus Mora's forbidden knowledge, Miraak began to develop powers that went far beyond what any Dragonborn should possess. He learned to create servants from the minds of mortals, bending their will to his own, and creating what we now know as the cultists of Miraak. He discovered how to craft powerful artifacts imbued with his own essence, including his distinctive mask and sword, both of which would become legendary items of immense power. Most importantly, he learned the secret of Dragon Aspect, a shout that allows the user to partially take on the form and power of a dragon while remaining in mortal flesh. This transformation represented Miraak's complete embrace of his dragon nature and his rejection of his humanity, marking his evolution from liberator to tyrant. With these new powers, Miraak began his conquest of Solstheim, the island that would become his primary stronghold and the center of his growing cult. He built temples in his honor, and commanded the local population to worship him as a god king, using his ability to bend minds to ensure absolute loyalty from his followers. The architecture of these temples is particularly interesting because it combines Nordic stonework with dragon motifs and Daedric symbolism, creating a unique aesthetic that reflects Miraak's complex nature as a Nordic hero turned Daedric champion turned would-be dragon god. But Miraak's ambitions extended far beyond Solstheim, because he had learned from Hermaeus Mora that Alduin would eventually return to devour the world, and he intended to be ready for that confrontation. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. He would gather enough power to challenge Alduin directly, defeat the world leader, and then position himself as the supreme ruler of all Tamriel in the aftermath. This plan required him to continue growing stronger, which meant seeking out more dragons to kill and more forbidden knowledge to acquire, both of which put him on a collision course with the other heroes of the Dragon War. The confrontation between Miraak and the other tongues was inevitable, because his former allies recognized that he had become just another tyrant seeking to oppress humanity. Led by heroes whose names have been lost to time, but whose deeds live on in Nordic legend, a coalition of tongues and their mortal allies laid siege to Miraak's stronghold on Solstheim. The battle was apocalyptic in scope, with Thu'um echoing across the island as Dragonborn fought against Tongue, dragon battled dragon, and the very landscape was reshaped by the conflict. But despite his immense power and the advantages granted by Hermaeus Mora's knowledge, Miraak found himself overwhelmed by the combined might of his enemies. Realizing that defeat was imminent, Miraak made a desperate gambit that would define the next several thousand years of his existence. Rather than face destruction, he used his connection to Hermaeus Mora to escape into Apocrypha, the Daedric prince's realm of forbidden knowledge. This wasn't a rescue so much as it was a trap, because once in Apocrypha, Miraak found himself unable to leave without Mora's permission, effectively making him a prisoner in the very realm he had sought to use for his own advantage. Hermaeus Mora, of course, had planned this outcome from the beginning, because the Prince of Fate knew that Miraak would eventually serve his purposes better as a captive champion than as a free agent in Tamriel. In Apocrypha, Miraak's existence became a strange form of torment disguised as privilege, because while he retained his power and continued to grow stronger by studying Mora's vast libraries of forbidden knowledge, he was completely cut off from the world he had sought to rule. The realm of Apocrypha itself is a nightmarish landscape of infinite libraries, impossible geometries, and lurking horrors that exist to serve Hermaeus Mora's will. The books contain knowledge that can drive mortals insane, the architecture defies logical understanding, and the very air is filled with a sense of oppressive omniscience that reflects Mora's all-seeing nature. For a being like Miraak, who had grown accustomed to absolute power over others, being reduced to little more than Mora's prized pet must have been psychologically devastating. But Miraak adapted to his imprisonment with the same ruthless pragmatism that had defined his rise to power, because he began to plan for his eventual escape while simultaneously serving Mora's interests. He became the prince's champion in Apocrypha, hunting down other mortals who had been trapped in the realm and eliminating threats to Mora's dominion. He also continued to study forbidden knowledge, growing ever more powerful but also more alien in his thinking as the centuries passed. During this time, Miraak's understanding of reality itself began to change as he absorbed knowledge that was never meant for mortal minds, and his personality became increasingly detached from human concerns and motivations. The key to understanding Miraak's mindset during his imprisonment is recognizing that time works differently in Daedric realms, especially one as conceptually complex as Apocrypha. While thousands of years passed in Tamriel, Miraak's experience of time would have been fractured and non-linear, with moments of clarity punctuated by periods where past, present, and future became meaningless distinctions. This temporal displacement would have contributed to his growing alienation from his own humanity and his increasing identification with his dragon nature. Meanwhile, in the mortal world, Miraak's influence didn't entirely disappear with his banishment to Apocrypha, because his cult, on Solstheim, continued to operate under the guidance of his most devoted followers. These cultists maintained his temples, preserved his teachings, and waited for the promised return of their master. Over the millennia, the cult evolved and adapted to changing circumstances, but it never lost sight of its ultimate goal of preparing for Miraak's return. The cultists developed their own hierarchy and rituals, created powerful artifacts in Miraak's honor, and even learned to channel some of his power through their worship and devotion. They became masters of mental manipulation and mind control, reflecting their master's own abilities, and they worked tirelessly to spread his influence throughout Solstheim and beyond. The cult's persistence is remarkable when you consider that they were operating without direct contact with their deity for thousands of years, relying only on prophetic visions and ancient teachings to guide their actions. This level of dedication suggests that Miraak's original mind-bending abilities were so powerful that they created a form of spiritual and psychological dependency that persisted across generations, binding his followers to him even across the barriers between realms. The cult's influence on Solstheim's development cannot be understated, because they shaped the island's culture and politics in subtle but significant ways, always working toward the goal of preparing for their master's return. During the centuries of Miraak's absence, Tamriel experienced numerous world-changing events, including the fall of the Snow Elves, the rise and fall of various Nordic kingdoms, the establishment of the Septim Empire, and countless smaller conflicts and transformations. But none of these events were as significant to Miraak's story as the return of Alduin the World Eater in the Fourth Era, because this event would finally provide the opportunity he had been waiting for to escape his imprisonment and reclaim his place in the mortal world. When Alduin returned to Skyrim and began resurrecting ancient dragons from their burial mounds, the prophecy of the last Dragonborn began to unfold, and a new hero emerged to challenge the World Eater. This last Dragonborn represented everything that Miraak had once been, a mortal blessed with a dragon soul and the power to permanently destroy dragons by absorbing their essence. But, unlike Miraak, this new Dragonborn fought not for personal power, but for the salvation of the world, embodying the heroic ideals that Miraak had abandoned millennia ago. The emergence of the last Dragonborn created a unique opportunity for Miraak, because the presence of another Dragonborn in the world weakened the barriers between realms and provided him with a potential pathway back to Tamriel. But it also represented a threat, because if this new Dragonborn succeeded in defeating Alduin, they would become immensely powerful and potentially impossible for Miraak to overcome in single combat. This created a complex strategic situation where Miraak needed to act quickly to escape Apocrypha, while also ensuring that he would be strong enough to defeat his potential rival when the time came for their inevitable confrontation. Miraak's solution to this dilemma was characteristically manipulative and far-reaching, because he began to assert his influence over the dragons that the last Dragonborn was fighting, stealing the souls that should have gone to his rival and using that power to strengthen himself while weakening his opponent. This soul-stealing ability demonstrated just how much Miraak's power had grown during his imprisonment, because it required him to project his influence across dimensional barriers and overcome the natural metaphysical connection between Dragonborn and Dragon souls. The effect on the last Dragonborn would have been deeply disturbing, watching potential power slip away just as victory seemed assured, but it also served as a warning that something ancient and dangerous was stirring in the shadows of reality. The first direct contact between Miraak and the last Dragonborn occurred when the new hero traveled to Solstheim to investigate the strange behavior of its inhabitants, many of whom had begun working on mysterious construction projects while in a trance-like state. These people were under Miraak's influence, compelled to build monuments in his honor and prepare the way for his return, but they had no memory of their actions while under his control. This phenomenon demonstrated that Miraak's power had grown to the point where he could influence minds across dimensional boundaries, bending mortals to his will, even while trapped in Apocrypha. The mind control effect was particularly insidious because it left victims with gaps in their memory and a vague sense that they had lost time, creating confusion and fear throughout Solstheim's population. when the last Dragonborn confronted Miraak's cultists and began disrupting their operations. It triggered a more direct response from the first Dragonborn, who began appearing to his rival in visions and dreams. These encounters revealed Miraak's personality as it had evolved over thousands of years of imprisonment, showing him to be arrogant, contemptuous of mortals, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. He viewed the last Dragonborn not as an equal, but as a pretender to power that rightfully belonged to him, and he made it clear that he intended to reclaim his position as the only true Dragonborn in existence. The psychological warfare that Miraak employed during these encounters was sophisticated and targeted, designed to undermine his rival's confidence while demonstrating his own vast knowledge and power. He revealed intimate details about the last Dragonborn's adventures and abilities, proving that he had been watching and studying his opponent from across the dimensional divide. This omniscient perspective was meant to be intimidating, but it also revealed something important about Miraak's state of mind. His obsession with the last Dragonborn had become all-consuming, suggesting that his imprisonment had left him desperate for meaningful interaction with another being of comparable power. The relationship between Miraak and Hermaeus Mora during this period was complex and strained, because while Mora had allowed and perhaps even encouraged Miraak's interference with the last Dragonborn, the Prince of Fate had his own agenda that didn't necessarily align with his champion's desires for freedom and revenge. Mora saw both Dragonborn as potential servants who could advance his goals of acquiring and controlling knowledge, and he was content to let them fight, while positioning himself to claim the winner as his new champion. This created a three-way conflict where Miraak sought to escape his imprisonment and destroy his rival. The last Dragonborn fought to save Solstheim and ultimately the world from Miraak's influence, and Hermaeus Mora manipulated both sides toward an outcome that would serve his own interests. The complexity of this relationship is revealed through the various artifacts and tomes that Mora had provided to Miraak over the centuries, each one increasing his power while also deepening his dependence on the Prince of Fate. Miraak's escape from Apocrypha was finally achieved through a combination of his own accumulated power, the weakening of dimensional barriers caused by the presence of two Dragonborn in the world, and the unwitting assistance of the last Dragonborn, who was manipulated into opening pathways between realms while seeking to stop Miraak's influence. The mechanics of this escape involved the last Dragonborn reading from the Black Books, powerful artifacts that served as gateways into Apocrypha, and following a trail of clues that led deeper into Mora's realm. Each step of this journey was orchestrated by Miraak and Hermaeus Mora, working in apparent cooperation, though both had hidden agendas that would eventually put them in conflict with each other. The last Dragonborn's journey through Apocrypha revealed the true nature of Miraak's imprisonment, showing that while he had gained immense knowledge and power, he had also become increasingly isolated and detached from the world he claimed to want to rule. The realm itself had left its mark on him, twisting his perceptions and amplifying the darker aspects of his dragon nature, while suppressing whatever remained of his original humanity. When the final confrontation between the two Dragonborn finally occurred, it was set in the heart of Apocrypha itself, surrounded by Hermaeus Mora's vast libraries and under the watchful gaze of the Prince of Fate. This setting was symbolically perfect, because it represented the corruption of knowledge that had defined Miraak's fall from grace and the ultimate consequence of his deal with the Daedric Prince. The battle between the first and last Dragonborn was epic in scope, featuring the full range of Thu'um powers, magical abilities, and martial skills that each warrior had developed over their respective careers. Miraak's combat style reflected his millennia of experience and study, incorporating techniques and strategies that no mortal opponent could have anticipated, while the last Dragonborn relied on adaptability, determination, and the power gained from countless adventures across Skyrim and beyond. During the fight, Miraak demonstrated abilities that went far beyond what any previous Dragonborn had shown, including the power to summon spectral dragons, manipulate the environment of Apocrypha itself, and temporarily achieve a partial dragon transformation that dramatically increased his physical capabilities. These powers were the result of his long study of forbidden knowledge and his deep understanding of dragon nature, but they also revealed how far he had traveled from his original identity as a Nordic hero. The last Dragonborn's victory in this battle was achieved not through superior power alone, but through the intervention of Hermaeus Mora himself, who betrayed Miraak at the crucial moment by draining his power and offering it to the victor. This betrayal was the inevitable result of Miraak's attempt to defy his patron and achieve true independence, something that Hermaeus Mora could never allow. The Prince of Fate had been planning this outcome from the moment he first approached Miraak millennia earlier, seeing the first Dragonborn as a temporary tool rather than a permanent ally. Miraak's final moments were both tragic and fitting, because he died as he had lived for the past several thousand years, as a pawn in Hermaeus Mora's vast schemes, rather than as the independent god king he had always believed himself to be. The irony of Miraak's fate is particularly poignant when considered in the context of Elder Scrolls themes about power, knowledge, and the price of ambition. He began as a hero fighting for the freedom of his people against draconic tyranny, but his desire for power and his willingness to make deals with dangerous forces ultimately led to his becoming exactly the kind of tyrant he had originally opposed. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and the dangers of seeking shortcuts to strength through forbidden knowledge. The relationship between power and responsibility is central to understanding why Miraak failed where other heroes succeeded, because he never learned to balance his abilities with wisdom and restraint. But Miraak's legacy extends far beyond his personal tragedy, because his story illuminates important aspects of Elder Scrolls, metaphysics, and lore that have implications for understanding the nature of dragons, Dragonborn, and the Thu'um itself. The revelation that a Dragonborn could become corrupted by their dragon nature provides insight into why the Thu'um was eventually abandoned by most Nordic warriors in favor of conventional magic and martial skills. If even the most powerful and supposedly noble practitioners of the voice could fall to the dominating impulses inherent in dragon souls, then the Thu'um represented a fundamental danger to the stability of human society. This understanding helps explain why the Greybeards adopted their philosophy of restraint and meditation, seeking to master not just the power of the Thu'um, but the dragon impulses that come with it. Miraak's ability to manipulate and control other minds also reveals disturbing implications about the potential scope of Dragonborn abilities, suggesting that the power to dominate others might be as fundamental to the dragon soul as the ability to shout. This raises questions about the last Dragonborn's own potential for corruption and whether the cycle of heroism and tyranny that defined Miraak's story might eventually repeat itself. The fact that Hermaeus Mora showed interest in claiming the last Dragonborn as a replacement for Miraak suggests that the temptations and dangers that led to the first Dragonborn's fall are still present and waiting to ensnare future heroes who might be tempted by the promise of forbidden knowledge and ultimate power. The cultural impact of Miraak's story on the people of Solstheim and the broader Nordic culture cannot be understated, because his legend served as both inspiration and warning for future generations of warriors and scholars. The temples built in his honor became monuments to the dangers of unchecked ambition, while the cult that served him demonstrated how charismatic leaders could manipulate religious devotion for personal gain. The artifacts associated with Miraak, including his mask, sword, and staff, became legendary items that carried both great power and great danger, serving as reminders that strength without wisdom inevitably leads to destruction. These items continued to influence events long after Miraak's death, attracting adventurers and scholars who sought to unlock their secrets while risking corruption by the same forces that had destroyed their original owner. The scholarly study of Miraak's reign and fall has provided valuable insights into the nature of Daedric manipulation and the psychology of power, helping future generations recognize and resist similar temptations. The role of Hermaeus Mora in Miraak's story also reveals important information about the motivations and methods of the Daedric princes, particularly those who specialize in offering knowledge and power in exchange for service and loyalty. Mora's patient manipulation of Miraak over thousands of years demonstrates the vast timescales on which Daedric princes operate and their willingness to invest centuries or millennia in achieving their goals. The Prince of Fate's ultimate betrayal of Miraak reveals that even the most powerful mortal champions are ultimately expendable tools in the eyes of the Daedra, valuable only as long as they serve their patron's interests. This understanding has implications for anyone who might be tempted to make deals with Daedric princes, showing that such agreements inevitably favor the immortal party, and that mortals who believe they can outsmart or manipulate Daedric powers are almost certainly deluding themselves. The specific nature of Mora's realm, Apocrypha, as revealed through Miraak's story, also provides insight into the relationship between knowledge and madness that is central to understanding this particular prince's domain. The philosophical implications of Miraak's story extend beyond the immediate narrative to touch on fundamental questions about free will, determinism, and the nature of heroism itself. Miraak's transformation from liberator to tyrant raises questions about whether his fall was inevitable, given his dragon nature and the temptations he faced, or whether he made conscious choices that led to his corruption. The role of prophecy and fate in his story, particularly as manipulated by Hermaeus Mora, suggests that some aspects of his destiny were predetermined, but his responses to the challenges and opportunities he encountered were still matters of personal choice. This tension between fate and free will is a recurring theme in Elder Scrolls lore, and Miraak's story provides one of the most complex and detailed explorations of how these forces interact to shape the lives of individuals and the course of history. The comparison between Miraak and the last Dragonborn also illuminates the importance of moral character and personal values in determining how great power will be used, because both heroes possessed similar abilities but made fundamentally different choices about how to employ them. From a game design and narrative perspective, Miraak serves as the perfect antagonist for the Dragonborn DLC because he represents everything the player character could potentially become if they made different choices and allowed power to corrupt them. This mirror-like quality makes the conflict between the two Dragonborn deeply personal and philosophically significant, forcing players to confront the implications of their own power and consider the responsibilities that come with their abilities. The complexity of Miraak's character, with his mixture of admirable qualities and terrible flaws, creates a more nuanced and interesting antagonist than a simple villain motivated by generic evil desires. His intelligence, charisma, and genuine power make him a worthy opponent for the last Dragonborn, while his tragic backstory and gradual corruption create sympathy even as his actions demand opposition. The lore implications of Miraak's story also extend to questions about the nature of dragon souls and their relationship to mortality, because his millennia-long existence in Apocrypha demonstrates that Dragonborn may be functionally immortal under certain circumstances. This raises questions about the ultimate fate of the last Dragonborn, and whether they too might find themselves facing similar challenges as the centuries pass and their dragon nature becomes more pronounced. The fact that Miraak retained his sanity and identity despite thousands of years in a realm designed to drive mortals mad suggests that dragon souls provide some protection against certain forms of supernatural corruption, but his gradual alienation from humanity shows that this protection comes at the cost of emotional and spiritual connection to mortal life. Understanding Miraak's relationship with dragons themselves is also crucial to grasping the full scope of his character, because unlike other Dragonborn, who primarily destroyed dragons to gain their power, Miraak sought to dominate and control them as servants and allies. This approach reflects his fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of dragons, and his desire to recreate the hierarchical system of the Dragon War with himself at the top, rather than working to create something entirely new. His ability to bend dragons to his will was impressive, but ultimately self-defeating, because it reinforced the same patterns of domination and control that had made the original dragon rule so oppressive. The dragons that served Miraak were not willing allies, but enslaved beings forced to act against their nature, creating a system that was inherently unstable and doomed to eventual collapse. This misuse of power demonstrates one of the key differences between Miraak and truly heroic figures: his inability to conceive of relationships based on mutual respect and cooperation rather than dominance and submission. The environmental and cultural impact of Miraak's presence on Solstheim provides another layer of understanding about his character and methods, because the island itself bears the scars of his rule and the corruption of his influence. The architecture of his temples and strongholds reflects his attempt to synthesize Nordic, dragon, and Daedric elements into a unified aesthetic that would represent his unique status and power. These structures were designed not just as functional buildings, but as propaganda tools meant to impress and intimidate anyone who encountered them, demonstrating Miraak's understanding of the psychological aspects of rulership and his desire to be seen as a godlike figure worthy of worship and fear. The landscape around these sites was also altered by his presence, with areas of unnatural growth and decay that reflected the fundamental wrongness of his rule and his disconnection from the natural order. The persistence of these environmental effects long after his banishment shows how deeply his influence had penetrated the fabric of reality on Solstheim, creating lasting changes that would continue to affect the island for generations. The study of Miraak's magical abilities and artifacts provides valuable insights into the potential scope of Dragonborn powers and the ways in which the Thu'um can be combined with other forms of magic to create unprecedented effects. His mask, in particular, represents a masterwork of enchantment that combines dragon soul energy with Daedric knowledge to create an item of immense power and terrible danger. The mask's ability to regenerate and enhance its wearer's magical abilities, while also providing protection against various forms of attack, demonstrates the sophisticated understanding of magical theory that Miraak developed during his millennia of study. But the mask also serves as a symbol of his corruption, covering his face and hiding his humanity behind a draconic visage that reflects his internal transformation from man to monster. The fact that wearing the mask can influence the wearer's personality and decision-making processes shows how Miraak's corruption was literally built into his most important artifacts, ensuring that his influence would persist even after his physical destruction. This level of magical sophistication suggests that given enough time and resources, a Dragonborn could potentially achieve effects that rival or exceed those of the most powerful mages and even some Daedric princes, but only at the cost of their fundamental humanity and connection to the mortal world. The broader implications of Miraak's story for Elder Scrolls lore include questions about the cyclical nature of history and the tendency for patterns of conflict and corruption to repeat themselves across different eras and cultures. His rise and fall mirrors similar stories throughout Tamrielic history, from the transformation of the Khmer into the Dunmer under the influence of Daedric princes, to the corruption of various Nordic heroes and kings throughout the ages. This suggests that the temptations and challenges that led to Miraak's downfall are not unique to his situation, but represent fundamental aspects of the relationship between mortals and power in the Elder Scrolls universe. Understanding these patterns can help scholars and adventurers recognize similar situations and hopefully avoid making the same mistakes that led to previous tragedies. The fact that such stories continue to repeat themselves, despite the lessons of history, suggests either that each generation must learn these truths for themselves, or that the forces involved are so fundamental to the nature of reality that they cannot be permanently overcome, only temporarily resisted. The academic study of Miraak's reign has also contributed to a better understanding of ancient Nordic culture and the social and political structures that existed during the Dragon War period. His transformation from hero to tyrant provides insight into the pressures and challenges faced by leaders during times of existential crisis, when the survival of entire peoples depended on the actions of individual champions. The gradual corruption of his followers and the establishment of his cult demonstrate how charismatic authority can be perverted into religious tyranny, providing lessons that remain relevant to understanding political and religious movements throughout history. The persistence of his cult across millennia also reveals the power of ideology and belief to maintain organizational continuity even in the absence of direct leadership, showing how deeply held convictions can be passed down through generations and adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character. From a theological and philosophical perspective within the Elder Scrolls universe, Miraak's story raises important questions about the nature of divinity and the relationship between gods and mortals. His attempt to achieve godhood through the accumulation of power and knowledge represents one path toward transcendence, but his ultimate failure demonstrates the limitations of this approach when not balanced by wisdom and moral development. The contrast between his methods and those of figures like Talos, who achieved true divinity through heroic action and self-sacrifice, highlights the difference between power sought for its own sake and power earned through service to others. This distinction is crucial for understanding why some mortals successfully ascend to godhood, while others, like Miraak, remain trapped in cycles of ambition and frustration that ultimately lead to their destruction. The role of Hermaeus Mora as both enabler and destroyer in Miraak's story also provides insight into the complex relationship between mortal ambition and divine manipulation, showing how Daedric princes can use mortal desires as tools to achieve their own incomprehensible goals. The technological and magical innovations developed by Miraak and his followers during his reign represent significant advances in the understanding of mind control, soul manipulation, and the practical applications of the Thu'um in everyday life. The techniques used to influence large numbers of people simultaneously, creating the trance-like states observed on Solstheim during his attempted return, demonstrate sophisticated applications of dragon speech that go far beyond simple combat applications. These innovations had the potential to revolutionize Nordic society and possibly all of Tamriel, but they were ultimately used for oppressive rather than liberating purposes, showing how technological and magical advancement without moral guidance can become tools of tyranny rather than progress. The architectural and engineering achievements of Miraak's cult, particularly in the construction of temples and monuments that have survived for thousands of years, also represent significant advances in building techniques and materials science that could have benefited future generations if they had been developed for constructive rather than megalomaniacal purposes. The artistic and cultural legacy of Miraak's reign can be seen in the distinctive aesthetic style that emerged from the fusion of Nordic, dragon, and Daedric influences, creating a unique visual language that continues to influence artistic expression on Solstheim and beyond. The recovery and study of Miraak's personal effects, including his weapons, armor, and various magical artifacts, has provided unprecedented insight into the crafting techniques and magical theories of the Dragon War period. These items represent the pinnacle of ancient Nordic artifice, combining traditional metalworking and enchanting skills with knowledge gained from the study of dragon remains and Daedric texts. The complexity and sophistication of these artifacts demonstrate that the technological and magical capabilities of ancient Nordic civilization were far more advanced than previously understood, but they also show how this knowledge was concentrated in the hands of a few powerful individuals rather than being shared for the benefit of all. This concentration of advanced knowledge in the hands of would-be tyrants represents a recurring pattern throughout Tamrielic history, where periods of innovation and discovery are often followed by conflict and the loss of valuable knowledge due to the ambitions of those who seek to monopolize rather than share their discoveries. The psychological profile that emerges from the study of Miraak's actions, writings, and artifacts reveals a complex individual whose initially noble motivations were gradually corrupted by the very power he sought to use for good. The evidence suggests that his transformation was not sudden but occurred over many years, with each compromise of his principles making the next one easier and more justifiable in his own mind. This gradual corruption process provides valuable insight into how good people can become villains when they lose sight of their original values and allow their methods to be shaped by expedience rather than morality. The isolation inherent in his great power, which set him apart from ordinary mortals and made normal human relationships increasingly difficult, likely contributed to his emotional detachment and growing inability to empathize with those he claimed to protect. The combination of increasing power and decreasing human connection created a feedback loop that accelerated his transformation from hero to tyrant, demonstrating the importance of maintaining ties to humanity and humility even in the face of great success and capability. The strategic and tactical lessons that can be learned from Miraak's military campaigns and his eventual defeat provide valuable insights for future leaders and generals who might face similar challenges in organizing resistance movements or defending against overwhelming odds. His initial success in fighting the dragons demonstrates the effectiveness of unconventional warfare tactics and the importance of exploiting enemy weaknesses rather than engaging in direct confrontations where the odds are unfavorable. However, his ultimate failure shows the limitations of relying too heavily on personal power and charisma rather than building sustainable institutions and training competent subordinates who can continue the mission in the leader's absence. The fact that his cult survived for millennia after his banishment while remaining completely dependent on his eventual return demonstrates both the power of his original leadership and the fundamental weakness of movements built around individual personalities rather than shared principles and distributed authority. This pattern has repeated itself throughout Tamrielic history, with charismatic leaders creating powerful but fragile organizations that collapse when their central figure is removed or corrupted. The intelligence and counterintelligence aspects of Miraak's operations also reveal sophisticated understanding of information, warfare, and psychological manipulation that was remarkably advanced for his historical period. His ability to maintain networks of agents and informants throughout Solstheim and beyond, coordinated through a combination of magical compulsion and ideological conviction, demonstrates strategic thinking that anticipated developments in espionage and covert operations by thousands of years. The methods used to identify and eliminate potential threats to his rule, including the systematic targeting of rival tongues and potential Dragonborn candidates, show a level of strategic paranoia that was both tactically sound and psychologically revealing of his growing isolation and fear of betrayal. These same techniques were later adopted and refined by various intelligence organizations throughout Tamrielic history, showing how innovations developed for oppressive purposes can sometimes find legitimate applications in the hands of more ethical practitioners. The economic and social systems established by Miraak during his reign on Solstheim provide fascinating insights into alternative models of governance and resource allocation that were both highly effective and deeply problematic from ethical perspectives. His use of mind control to ensure perfect labor discipline and eliminate economic inefficiencies created a society that was extremely productive in material terms, but completely lacking in personal freedom and individual expression. The temples and monuments constructed during this period represent massive investments of human labor and resources that might have been used for improving living conditions or developing beneficial technologies, but were instead devoted to glorifying their ruler and intimidating potential opponents. This misallocation of social resources for propaganda and ego gratification, rather than genuine improvement in quality of life, represents another recurring pattern in the history of tyrannical regimes, showing how the concentration of power in individual hands almost inevitably leads to decisions that serve the ruler's psychological needs rather than the population's practical interests. The long-term environmental and magical consequences of Miraak's activities continue to affect Solstheim and surrounding areas even after his final destruction, creating ongoing challenges for the island's inhabitants and providing natural laboratories for studying the effects of prolonged exposure to dragon magic and Daedric influence. The areas around his former strongholds exhibit unusual magical properties that can be both beneficial and dangerous, with some locations providing enhanced magical regeneration, while others drain energy from living beings or distort the flow of time and space. These persistent effects demonstrate that the most powerful magical practitioners can leave permanent marks on the physical world that outlast their own existence, creating legacies that continue to influence events long after their deaths. The study of these phenomena has advanced understanding of magical theory and environmental magic, but it has also created practical problems for communities that must deal with unpredictable magical effects in their daily lives. The relationship between Miraak's story and the broader themes of Elder Scrolls lore reveals connections to fundamental concepts about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the relationship between order and chaos that define much of the metaphysical framework underlying all the games and stories in the series. His transformation from champion of freedom to agent of tyranny reflects the eternal struggle between the forces of creation and destruction, progress, and stagnation that plays out on both cosmic and personal scales throughout Tamrielic history. The role of knowledge and learning in his corruption connects to broader themes about the double-edged nature of wisdom and the dangers inherent in seeking power through understanding rather than through moral development and service to others. These philosophical dimensions of his story elevated beyond simple adventure narrative to profound meditation on questions that have challenged human thinkers throughout history, making Miraak one of the most intellectually sophisticated antagonists in all of fantasy literature. The comparative analysis between Miraak and other fallen heroes throughout Elder Scrolls lore reveals common patterns and unique elements that help illuminate the specific factors that lead to corruption versus those that enable redemption and continued heroism. Unlike figures such as Manimarco, who seemed to embrace evil from early in his career, or Dagoth-Ur, whose madness was largely the result of divine infection, Miraak's fall was gradual and self-inflicted, the result of choices made over extended periods rather than sudden transformation or external corruption. This makes his story particularly tragic because it shows how even the most noble and capable individuals can destroy themselves through pride, ambition, and the gradual erosion of their moral foundations. The specific role played by his dragon soul in this process provides unique insights into the challenges faced by Dragonborn characters and the ongoing internal struggle they must wage against their own nature. The fact that he ultimately lost this struggle while the last Dragonborn apparently succeeded suggests that personality, values, and conscious choice play crucial roles in determining whether great power becomes a force for good or evil. The practical applications of studying Miraak's techniques and methods extend beyond historical interest to include valuable lessons for modern practitioners of magic, politics, and leadership, who can learn from both his successes and his failures. His innovations in the use of the Thu'um for non-combat applications have influenced the development of dragon speech techniques used by the Greybeards and other contemporary practitioners, though always with careful attention to the ethical implications and potential for abuse. The organizational methods he developed for managing large-scale operations and coordinating complex projects have been studied by military strategists and administrators, though again with constant awareness of the need to balance efficiency with respect for individual rights and freedoms. The psychological techniques he employed for motivation and persuasion have contributed to understanding of leadership and influence, but with heavy emphasis on the importance of using such knowledge responsibly rather than manipulatively. These practical applications demonstrate how even the study of villainous figures can contribute positively to knowledge and understanding, provided that the lessons learned are applied with wisdom and ethical consideration. The artistic and literary influence of Miraak's story extends far beyond the immediate context of Elder Scrolls lore to inspire countless works of fiction, art, and scholarship that explore similar themes of power, corruption, and the complex relationship between heroism and tyranny. His character has become an archetype for the fallen hero whose noble intentions are corrupted by the very power they sought to use for good, providing a template that writers and storytellers continue to use and reinterpret in new contexts and settings. The visual design elements associated with his character, including his distinctive mask and armor, have influenced artistic representations of similar figures throughout fantasy media, creating a recognizable aesthetic vocabulary for depicting ancient power and corrupted nobility. The philosophical and psychological complexity of his character has also inspired academic study and analysis, with scholars using his story as a case study for examining questions about moral development, the nature of evil, and the relationship between power and responsibility. This broader cultural impact demonstrates how well-crafted fictional characters can transcend their original contexts to become tools for exploring universal human concerns and challenges. The technological implications of Miraak's achievements in magical research and artifact creation continue to influence theoretical discussions about the ultimate potential of combining dragon magic with conventional arcane techniques and Daedric knowledge. The artifacts he created represent technological marvels that push the boundaries of what was previously thought possible, suggesting that with sufficient time, resources, and knowledge, individual practitioners might achieve effects that rival those of entire institutions or even divine beings. However, the corrupting effects of pursuing such advanced magical knowledge without proper ethical foundation serve as warnings about the dangers of unchecked technological development in any field, magical or mundane. The principles underlying his innovations have been studied and refined by subsequent researchers, but always with careful attention to safety protocols and ethical guidelines designed to prevent repetition of his mistakes. The fact that his greatest achievements were also the instruments of his own destruction provides a powerful metaphor for the relationship between progress and responsibility that remains relevant to contemporary discussions about scientific and technological advancement. The geopolitical implications of Miraak's activities during his original reign and his attempted return have had lasting effects on the political landscape of northeastern Tamriel, influencing relationships between Skyrim, Morrowind, and the various independent settlements throughout the region. His control of Solstheim during his active period established precedents for the island's semi-autonomous status that continued to influence its governance and relationship with larger political entities. The cult networks he established created connections between different communities that persisted long after his banishment, contributing to cultural exchange and political cooperation in some cases, while also providing channels for less legitimate activities in others. The fear and respect his name continues to inspire among local populations has been both a source of stability, deterring potential troublemakers who remember the stories of his power, and instability, attracting ambitious individuals who hope to claim his legacy and repeat his achievements. Understanding these ongoing political ramifications is crucial for anyone seeking to understand the current state of affairs in the region and the historical factors that continue to shape contemporary events. The religious and theological implications of Miraak's story have contributed to scholarly debates about the nature of divinity, the relationship between mortals and gods, and the proper role of powerful individuals in society that continue to influence religious thought throughout Tamriel. His attempt to achieve godhood through the accumulation of power rather than through service and sacrifice represents a fundamental challenge to traditional Nordic religious values, forcing theologians to articulate more clearly the distinctions between true divinity and mere temporal power. The fact that he was ultimately destroyed by the very forces he sought to control or manipulate has been interpreted as divine judgment by some religious thinkers, while others see it as natural consequence of violating fundamental spiritual principles. The persistence of his cult and the continued veneration he receives from some quarters raise uncomfortable questions about the nature of religious devotion and the tendency of some believers to worship power rather than virtue. These theological discussions have practical implications for religious education and the training of clergy, who must help believers distinguish between legitimate spiritual authority and dangerous spiritual manipulation. The psychological and sociological studies of Miraak's followers, both ancient and modern, have provided valuable insights into the mechanisms of cult formation, the psychology of extreme devotion, and the social conditions that make populations vulnerable to charismatic manipulation. The fact that his cult was able to maintain organizational coherence and ideological commitment across thousands of years without direct contact with their leader demonstrates the power of shared belief systems and ritual practices to create social bonds that transcend normal temporal and geographical limitations. The methods used to identify and recruit new members, indoctrinate them into the group's beliefs and practices, and maintain their loyalty, even in the face of external opposition, have been studied as examples of both effective organizational management and dangerous social manipulation. The gradual psychological changes observed in long-term cult members, including increased isolation from non-believers, decreased critical thinking abilities, and growing dependence on group approval for self-worth, provide warnings about the potential dangers of excessive religious or ideological commitment. Understanding these patterns has practical applications for helping individuals recognize and resist similar manipulation attempts, as well as for developing therapeutic interventions for those who have been affected by cult involvement. The forensic analysis of Miraak's crimes and the methods used to investigate and prosecute his followers represents one of the earliest examples of systematic criminal investigation and justice administration in Nordic history, establishing precedents and procedures that influenced the development of legal systems throughout the region. The challenges faced by investigators trying to understand and prove crimes involving mind control, magical compulsion, and supernatural influence pushed the development of new investigative techniques and legal theories that had to account for phenomena outside normal human experience. The questions of legal responsibility and moral culpability raised by cases involving magically influenced behavior forced legal scholars to develop new frameworks for understanding agency, intention, and accountability in criminal acts. The procedures developed for identifying and neutralizing magical evidence, protecting witnesses from supernatural retaliation, and ensuring fair trials for defendants claiming magical coercion became models for handling similar cases throughout Tamrielic legal systems. These innovations in criminal justice and legal procedure represent lasting positive contributions that emerged from the effort to understand and respond to Miraak's criminal activities, showing how the study of even the most terrible crimes can contribute to the development of more effective and just legal institutions. The medical and healing aspects of dealing with Miraak's influence on his victims have advanced understanding of mental healing, psychological trauma, and the treatment of magically induced psychological conditions that continues to benefit healers and their patients throughout the Elder Scrolls world. The distinctive patterns of psychological damage observed in individuals who had been subjected to prolonged mind control required the development of new therapeutic techniques and healing approaches that addressed both the magical and mundane aspects of their condition. The combination of conventional counseling and magical healing proved most effective for helping victims recover their sense of personal agency and rebuild their ability to make independent decisions. The study of these cases also revealed previously unknown connections between mental and physical health, showing how magical influence on the mind could create lasting changes in physical brain function that required both magical and medical intervention to fully address. The development of diagnostic criteria and treatment protocols for these conditions has created a new specialty within the healing arts that continues to evolve as understanding of magical psychology advances. So there you have it, the complete and comprehensive lore of Miraak, the first Dragonborn, a character whose story encompasses thousands of years of history and touches on fundamental questions about power, knowledge, corruption, and the nature of heroism itself. From his origins as a champion fighting for human freedom during the Dragon War, through his gradual corruption by forbidden knowledge and draconic impulses, to his ultimate defeat at the hands of the last Dragonborn, Miraak's tale serves as both a thrilling adventure story and profound cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power. His legacy continues to influence events throughout Tamriel, providing lessons for scholars, warnings for the ambitious, and inspiration for storytellers who recognize in his complex character a reflection of the eternal human struggle between our highest aspirations and our darkest impulses, making him one of the most fascinating and important figures in all of Elder Scrolls lore. And that's why his story continues to captivate players and lore enthusiasts decades after his introduction to the series.